She had pressed herself back against the cold glass of the floor-to-ceiling window until there was nowhere left to go, and still Evander Kaine's hand kept rising toward her face, slow and careful, and still every nerve in Calla Dunne's body screamed at her to run. "Don't," she breathed. His hand stopped mid-air 1 inch from her cheek. The entire 42nd floor seemed to hold its breath. Evander's dark eyes moved, slowly, deliberately, from her face down to the mottled purple bruise blooming along her jaw, then further to the ring of matching marks, circling her wrist like something a man had left behind when he'd grabbed her and hadn't let go. The expression on his face did not change, not exactly, but the air in the room did. "Tell me," Evander said, his voice dropping to something very quiet and very, very dangerous. "Who did that to you?" Calla Dunne had spent 6 years becoming invisible. It was a skill she had cultivated deliberately, the way some women cultivated a signature red lip or a killer pair of heels. She wore her dark hair pinned up in a low, sensible knot. She favored oversized blazers in charcoal and slate that skimmed past her wide hips and gave nothing away about the soft, full body underneath. She kept her desk in the corner of the provenance research department at Halloway Fine Arts, one of Chicago's oldest and most prestigious auction houses. And she did her job so quietly and so brilliantly that most of her colleagues had stopped registering her presence entirely. She liked it that way. Halloway handled hundreds of millions of dollars in fine art transactions every year, old masters, impressionists, contemporary giants. At the center of every legitimate sale was a provenance file, a documented chain of ownership tracing a piece back through decades or centuries, verifying it had never been looted, forged, or laundered. Calla built those files. She cross-referenced bills of sale, exhibition records, auction catalogs, estate inventories, death certificates. She caught inconsistencies that other researchers missed because she had the kind of mind that remembered everything and trusted nothing. It was that mind that got her into trouble. It was a grey Thursday in October when she first spotted the anomaly. She was auditing provenance files for an upcoming contemporary art sale, 7 pieces, all consigned through a private holding company called Pellerin Group LLC. The paperwork was immaculate, almost too immaculate. Each piece had a clean chain stretching back exactly 15 years, no further, as though the art had simply materialized in 2011 without any prior history. The exhibition records were real, the insurance appraisals were real, the photographs were real. But 2 of the pieces appeared in an obscure German museum's pre-war acquisition log under different names with different measurements, with just enough variation to pass a cursory review. Calla sat very still at her desk for a long time. Then she pulled up the financial records for Pellerin Group. 17 transactions over 4 years, $43 million, channeled through the auction house's legitimate sales system, broken into amounts small enough to avoid automatic flags, distributed across 6 different buyer accounts, all of which, when she drilled further, traced back to the same offshore parent entity registered in the Cayman Islands. Someone was using Halloway Fine Arts to wash $43 million. Her hands were shaking by the time she copied the files to her personal encrypted drive. Protocol was clear. She was supposed to report irregularities to her department head, to Ryland. She found him in the loading dock behind the auction house, overseeing the installation of the upcoming sales centerpiece, a 7-foot abstract canvas that had sold at preview for $4 million without a single public bid. "Ryland," she touched his arm, "I need to show you something. The Pellerin Group consignments. There's a serious problem with the provenance documentation, and the financial routing is—" She didn't finish the sentence. Ryland's face did something Calla had never seen it do in 6 years. The smooth, practiced composure cracked. Beneath it was something ugly and frantic and very afraid. He grabbed her, both hands, her wrist and her jaw, fingers digging in with the kind of force that had nothing casual about it. He dragged her sideways behind a pallet of crated paintings out of sight of the install crew. "Stop." His voice was low and vicious, and nothing like the man who had approved her vacation requests. "You didn't find anything. You didn't see anything. You are going to put whatever you downloaded back where you got it, and you are going to walk out of this building, and tomorrow you are going to come in and do your job and never mention Pellerin Group again." His grip tightened until her vision blurred at the edges. "Or I will make sure the people who own those accounts find out exactly who you are. And they will not send a lawyer, Calla. Do you understand what I am telling you?" She understood. She walked to the L stop on Michigan Avenue on legs that didn't feel like her own, rode north to her apartment in Logan Square, and sat on the edge of her bathtub for 40 minutes, staring at the bruise forming along her jawline and the dark red pressure marks ringing her wrist. She had never felt so small in her life. She decided she would quit. She would email her resignation in the morning, leave the encrypted drive on her desk, and disappear into a different city with a different name and a job where nobody knew what she had found. But before she could open her laptop the next morning, her phone rang. Halloway's front desk. Mr. Kaine would like to see her. A car was already waiting downstairs. Not a request. Evander Kaine did not look like a man who ran a private equity firm worth $3 billion. He looked like exactly what the Chicago Tribune Society page had called him once, in a caption beneath a photograph at a Museum of Contemporary Art gala, a problem. 6'3", dark suit, dark hair going silver at the temples, jaw like something carved out of a grudge. He had the kind of stillness that powerful men sometimes cultivate and dangerous men are simply born with. The 42nd floor of his building, the entire floor, was his private office, floor-to-ceiling glass on 3 sides. Lake Michigan in the distance, the color of hammered pewter. Kaine Holdings had owned a minority stake in Halloway Fine Arts for 11 years, long enough for Evander to have access to internal audit systems Calla hadn't known existed. "Calla Dunne," he said, without looking up from the file open on his desk. "Provenance research. 6 years. Spotless record." He looked up. His eyes were very dark. "You ran a full financial audit on the Pellerin Group consignments yesterday without authorization, and then you copied the files." She sat across from him in a chair that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and she thought about lying, and she looked at his face and understood that would be a waste of both their time. "I found a laundering scheme," she said. $43 million over 4 years. The provenance documents on at least 2 pieces are falsified. I can show you the original acquisition records from the Reichlen Museum archive in Stuttgart. The beneficial owner of the Pellerin accounts traces back to a Cayman entity called Blue Water Partners, Evander said. She stopped. "I know the name," he said, leaning back, his expression gone dangerously flat. "What I didn't know until 9 o'clock this morning, when my system flagged your download, was that someone had been running that operation through an asset I own." He stood from behind the desk. Slowly. He was very large and the office was very quiet. "You took the files to Ryland. He's my department head. It's protocol. What happened when you did?" She didn't answer immediately. She pulled the lapel of her blazer a little closer around her throat. A reflexive gesture, the same one she'd been making all morning over the high collar of her turtleneck. It wasn't high enough. Evander had crossed the floor without her noticing, the way large, quiet animals sometimes move. All controlled weight and no warning. He stopped beside her chair and reached toward her face, intending only to tip her chin up so she'd look at him, and Calla's body reacted before her brain could, every muscle locking, her whole frame pressing back against the glass. "Don't," she whispered. He stopped. He saw. The collar had slipped an inch. The bruise along her jaw was dark purple and fresh, and shaped precisely like 2 fingers and a thumb. "Tell me who did that to you." "Ryland." The word came out cracked. She hated how her voice sounded. She hated that she was trembling. "He grabbed me in the loading dock. He said if I didn't put the files back and keep quiet, The people behind the accounts would find out who I was. She forced herself to meet his eyes. He said they wouldn't send a lawyer. Evander did not move for a long moment. Then Sullivan. The man at the door, broad, quiet, so still Calla hadn't registered him, stepped forward. "Find Ryland. I don't care where he is." A pause. "Bring him to the warehouse on Goose Island." Sullivan was gone before Evander finished the sentence. Evander crouched down to her eye level, his large frame lowering deliberately, carefully, as though he was aware of how much space he occupied and had chosen to take up less of it. "Do you have the files with you?" She reached into her bag and pulled out the encrypted drive. She set it in his open palm. "You did the right thing," he said, "but you can't go home. If Ryland warned them last night, and I think he did, they know your name and your address. Blue Water Partners did not build a $43 million operation by leaving loose ends." He stood. "You're coming with me." She thought about arguing. She looked at his face and decided not to. The safe house was a penthouse in River North that looked, from the outside, like a residential building indistinguishable from a dozen others on the block. Inside, it was something else entirely. Clean lines, dark wood, original art on the walls that Calla's trained eye clocked immediately as worth more than she'd earn in a decade. Bram, Evander's second, a man with a scarred forearm and the settled disposition of someone who had long since stopped being surprised by anything, had the place swept and secured in under 12 minutes. Calla sat on the edge of a leather sectional and felt like a woman who had wandered into the wrong life. She was aware of how she looked. She had been aware of it for most of her adult life. The soft heaviness of her, the way her thighs pressed together when she sat, the way her blazers never quite lay flat across the fullest part of her. She was 31 years old, and she had made peace with most of it, mostly. But sitting in this penthouse, surrounded by men who looked assembled from a different set of specifications than ordinary humans, she felt the old familiar urge to apologize for taking up space. Evander reappeared from somewhere in the apartment carrying a first aid kit. He sat beside her, leaving room, a careful distance, and set it open on the coffee table. "May I?" He gestured toward her jaw. She nodded. He worked with a precision that surprised her. Antiseptic, arnica gel for the bruising, his touch so light she barely felt it. He didn't ask her to hold still. He just moved around her face with the careful patience of someone who had learned somewhere that some people flinched at unexpected contact. "I'm sorry," Calla said, because the silence was making her anxious. "This isn't exactly what you expected your Thursday to look like." Evander glanced at her. "You're apologizing for being assaulted." "I'm apologizing for being a problem. You found a $43 million money laundering scheme in documentation that 3 professional auditors had already cleared." He recapped the arnica and set it down. "You're not a problem, Calla. You're the only person in this situation who did their job correctly." She looked at him. Men didn't usually look at her the way Evander Kaine was looking at her. Not with pity, not with that particular flicker of dismissal she had learned to recognize early, the one that said she'd be pretty if, or shame about the. He looked at her like she was a fact he was taking seriously, like she was someone whose presence in the room made the room make more sense. She wasn't sure what to do with that. "Blue Water Partners," she said, because it was safer than the alternative. "You know who owns it?" His jaw tightened. The muscle in his cheek flickered once. "My cousin," Evander said. "Orson." The name landed in the room like something dropped from a great height. "Orson has been a silent partner in 3 of my holdings for 9 years, Evander continued. "He has had access to Halloway's consignment pipeline for the past 4. And Ryland was hired on Orson's personal recommendation." He stopped. "He's been laundering through my assets without my knowledge, and when Ryland texted him about you, he put a price on my head. Sullivan confirmed it an hour ago, 7 figures, to anyone who can tie off the Halloway leak before it reaches a federal desk." Evander held her gaze. "That means you." She had known it, somewhere in the back of her mind, since the loading dock. She had known it the moment Ryland's face changed, but hearing it stated plainly still made the room tilt slightly. "Okay," she said. Her voice was steadier than she felt. "Okay. I'm not going to spend the next 3 days shaking in a corner while your cousin's contractors try to find me." She stood up. "You have Ryland, and you have my files. But what you don't have is someone who can actually read them." She met his eyes. "Orson ran this for 4 years through an art auction house. That means there are provenance documents, financial instruments, insurance records, bill of sale chains. All of it designed to look legitimate to anyone who doesn't know exactly what they're looking at." She paused. "I know exactly what I'm looking at." Evander Kaine, for the first time since she had met him, looked like something had genuinely surprised him. Sullivan had a workstation set up in the dining room. He was good. Calla would give him that. He'd cracked the encryption on the Pellerin files and mapped the account structure in under 2 hours. But Sullivan saw data the way a locksmith sees a door, as a mechanism to be opened. He didn't see what was behind it. Calla sat down at the workstation at 3:30 in the afternoon and didn't stand up again until the city lights outside had gone full dark. She built the map from the inside out. The auction records first. She knew every legitimate catalog format, every accepted provenance notation, every variation that could pass standard institutional review. Orson's team was good, but they had made the mistake that all forgers eventually made. They had been too consistent. Real provenance documents had texture. They had idiosyncrasies, gaps, different handwriting on different decades of records, varying letterhead across institutions. Orson's files were seamless in exactly the wrong way. Then she followed the money. The auction sale proceeds flowed through Pellerin to a real estate holding LLC in Wilmington, Delaware, which paid management fees to a consulting firm in Malta, which made quarterly distributions to Blue Water Partners in the Caymans, which had a correspondent banking relationship with a private wealth manager in Geneva, who handled a discretionary investment portfolio for. There, Calla sat back. Evander was behind her. She hadn't heard him move. He was very quiet for a man of that size. "The Geneva portfolio," she said, tracing the line on the screen. "It's managed under a discretionary mandate, which means the beneficial owner's name stays off the wire transfers. But the portfolio ID is registered with FINMA, the Swiss financial regulator. If you file a mutual legal assistance request with that portfolio ID and attach the transaction trail I just mapped, Swiss authorities are legally required to freeze the account within 72 hours. She looked up at him over her shoulder. "Every dollar Orson laundered is sitting in that portfolio, all 43 million, and the moment that account freezes, he can't pay anyone." Bram let out a low whistle from the doorway. Evander stared at the screen, then at Calla, then at the screen again. "You mapped a 4-year laundering operation in 4 hours. I've been looking at fraudulent provenance documents for 6 years. I know what the mistakes look like." She paused. "I just never had a reason to follow them this far before." Evander leaned down, his forearm coming to rest on the desk beside her, his broad chest close behind her shoulder. She could smell him, cedar and something darker, expensive and very understated. "You are," he said quietly, "remarkable." The word landed differently than she expected. And then every light in the penthouse went out. The backup generator didn't kick in. The hum of Sullivan's servers died. The city outside the windows was still lit, but the penthouse was black and completely silent for 2 full seconds before Bram said, very flatly, "Jammer, they fried the grid." Evander moved. There was no other way to describe it. He simply moved fast and certain in the dark, his hand finding Calla's arm not with a grab but with a grip, firm and steady, pulling her out of the chair and away from the window. Bram, stairwell. The service stairs door was still mechanical. Bram had it open in seconds. They were in the stairwell when the front door of the penthouse came off its hinges, with a sound that Calla felt in her back teeth. She didn't think about the noise. She thought about her feet on the stairs, about Evander's hand on her arm, about not falling. 3 flights down, a landing, a turn, another flight. She could hear shouting above them and the flat crack of suppressed gunfire, and she ran anyway, her lungs burning, her thighs working hard, Bram ahead of her and Evander behind. They were 2 floors from the parking level when a man stepped out of the fire door below them. He was large, wearing tactical gear, and he raised a compact weapon toward Bram's chest. Calla threw herself sideways. She didn't think about it. Her body simply understood what her mind hadn't finished processing yet, that the man's angle of fire would miss her entirely if she moved left, and that Bram would be dead if she didn't. She hit the man at the shoulder, all her weight behind it, and she had weight, she had always had weight. And for the first time in her adult life, it felt like an asset rather than an apology, and the shot went into the ceiling above Bram's head instead of through his chest. The man shoved her off with his free arm. She hit the railing hard, her vision going grey at the edges, the metal biting into her side. Bram put him down before she'd finished sliding. Then, Calla. Evander's voice, rough with something she had never heard in it. He was beside her before she had finished catching her breath, his hands on her face, both hands checking her forehead, her cheekbone, the split in her lip where she'd caught the railing's edge. "Look at me. Are you with me?" "I'm with you." She tasted copper. "I'm fine, She met his eyes in the dark of the stairwell. I had a clear angle. Evander looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes. "You threw yourself at an armed man," he said, "to protect my second." He was going to shoot Bram. He could have killed you. He wasn't expecting me to move. She wiped her lip with the back of her hand. Nobody ever expects me to move. Something shifted in Evander's expression, something that had been held very carefully in place for a very long time. "I do," he said. They got out through the parking garage. An armored SUV, south on Lakeshore Drive, then west through neighborhoods that grew quieter and more industrial until they reached a building in Pilsen with a steel door and no signage, and exactly the kind of silence that meant the walls were very thick. Evander settled Calla on a cot in the back room. He cleaned her split lip with the same careful precision he'd used on her jaw earlier, without being asked, without commentary. His hands were not entirely steady. She noticed. She said nothing. "Why?" he asked finally, not about the tactical geometry of the stairwell about her. Calla looked at the ceiling for a moment. "Because your people protected me," she said, "before they knew whether I was worth protecting." A pause. "Most of my life I've been the person in the room that everyone looks straight through, or looks at and makes a calculation about before I've said a word. That I'm not sharp enough, not serious enough, not worth the effort of actually seeing." She looked at him. "You saw what I found. You took it seriously without questioning whether someone like me could have found it. Bram was about to take a bullet because Orson decided I was a loose end worth silencing. I wasn't going to stand there and watch that happen." Evander was very still. He reached up and cupped her face in both hands, large, careful, framing her jaw without pressure, and this time she didn't flinch, not even slightly. "You are not a loose end," he said. "You are the woman who found a $43 million hole in my organization that 4 professional auditors missed. You are the woman who mapped 4 years of criminal activity in a single evening and handed me a kill switch." His voice dropped. "And you are the woman who, apparently, will throw herself at armed contractors when the situation calls for it." His thumbs brushed the unbruised line of her cheek. "You are not invisible to me, Calla. You have not been invisible to me since the first file I pulled on you." She didn't say anything. He kissed her. It was not a small, tentative thing. It was the kind of kiss that had been building under pressure for hours. Forged in adrenaline and terrible circumstances, and the specific intimacy of surviving something together, and Calla reached up and held on, and he kissed her like he was learning something he intended to keep. When they finally pulled apart, The building was silent around them, and his forehead was resting against hers. "Tomorrow," Evander said, his voice level and very quiet. "I'm taking your transaction map to the U.S. Attorney's Office. I have a contact there who has been building a RICO case against organized crime money movement through legitimate arts institutions for 3 years. What you built tonight is the capstone he's been missing." He held her gaze. "Orson will be arrested by Thursday. The Geneva account will be frozen, and every person he hired to come after you will have no one left to answer to." Calla breathed in, breathed out. "And Ryland." "Ryland has been very cooperative," Evander said carefully, "one way or another." She decided not to ask follow-up questions on that particular point. She settled back against the cot and looked at the ceiling of the safe room and thought, quietly, about the fact that 48 hours ago she had been planning to quit her job and disappear into a smaller life in a different city. Instead, she had dismantled a criminal enterprise, survived an ambush, and been kissed by a man who looked at her like she was something that mattered. Evander. Yes. "I want my job back after this, whatever version of Halloway comes out the other side." She met his eyes. "I want to run the provenance department." He looked at her steadily. Something that might have been the beginning of a smile moved at the corner of his mouth. "You can run whatever you want," he said. She closed her eyes. For the first time since Thursday morning, something in her chest loosened. She had spent 6 years perfecting the art of being forgettable. She was done with that now. Orson Kaine still had resources, contacts, contingency plans Calla hadn't mapped yet. Men like him never kept everything in one account or one city or one name. But she had built the map once. She could build it again. And this time, she wouldn't be doing it alone.